Chelsea Football Club are an absolute shambles. And while as a Liverpool supporter I find a lot of enjoyment from Chelsea fans' dismay, their fall from grace from one of the Premier League's biggest clubs is an interesting case study in what not to do with a professional sports team. And in an effort to display one of the many key factors for Chelsea's fall from grace, I have developed a theory which I call the CKC, or otherwise the Caicedo-Kante comparison. See, Moises Caicedo is not the first instance of Chelsea signing a player who didn't live up to their expectations. Fernando Torres' move from Liverpool to Chelsea for $50 million is considered one of the biggest and most expensive flops in Premier League history. But in my opinion, the Torres signing is completely different than Moises Caicedo. See, during his tenure at Liverpool, Torres cemented himself as one of the best forwards in world football. And at the time of his transfer to Chelsea, $50 million actually seemed like a reasonable price tag for him. And while he did flop at Chelsea, it's honestly hard to blame the club for that, because it's nearly impossible to predict Torres' fall from grace, and hindsight's 2020. Nobody expected Torres to flop that hard at Chelsea. So while we can't compare Caicedo to Torres, who's one of the biggest flops in Chelsea history, we can actually compare him to one of Chelsea's greatest midfielders ever. And there are three key elements in the Caicedo-Kante comparison. The first one, they both play the same exact position. And while their playing styles aren't exactly the same, for all intents and purposes, both players played as a holding midfielder. The second element in their comparison is the evaluation of their clubs prior to their move to Chelsea. Obviously, we know N'golo Kante was a member of the historic Leicester City team that won the Premier League, and Moises Caicedo was a part of the overachieving Brighton team which made a push for European football last season. Finally, the last element in their comparison, they were both very short-lived at their clubs prior to Chelsea, with Kante only being at Leicester City for one season and Caicedo only being at Brighton for about a season and a half. So what do we get when we take these three elements from the Caicedo-Kante comparison? We have two players who play as holding midfielders, who are integral parts of smaller Premier League teams which drastically exceeded expectations, and finally they were only at these clubs which exceeded expectations for a short while. So at this point you might be asking yourself, okay, but what is the reason for this comparison? And the reason is it's a perfect example of Chelsea's current owners misunderstanding risk versus reward. And to demonstrate that, we actually have to use our imagination a little bit. Let's imagine a world where N'golo Kante doesn't become a Premier League and Champions League winner at Chelsea. Let's imagine that Kante actually struggled to make Chelsea's team. And finally, let's imagine what the impact would be if N'golo Kante ended up flopping. In my opinion, if Kante ended up being a flop, I don't think that many people would have been that alarmed or upset about it. Because when Chelsea bought Kante, they bought him for $32 million. And at the time, was that a lot of money? Yes, but it was a reasonable amount for what he had produced at Leicester the previous season. AKA, it's simple risk and reward. They risked $32 million and their reward was an outstanding midfielder. And to use the same exact comparison to Caicedo, they're risking over £100 million on him. So in the case of Kante, their reward was higher than their risk. Had Chelsea lost $32 million, that's not going to damage the club immensely. But in the case of Caicedo, Mudryk, Enzo Fernandez, their risk is significantly higher than any reward they could have gotten for these players. And in my opinion, this is the core part that's wrong about Chelsea's new ownership versus their old ownership. It really doesn't have to do with the players that much. It's all down to the ownership not mitigating the risk in their investments properly. And this improper mitigation of risk is the reason Chelsea are in a downward spiral. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to click like, leave a comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Please check out some of my other videos, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.